Dennis Lynn Rader is a man who has become a symbol of fear and double life. Born on March 9, 1945 in Kansas, he lived most of his life as an outwardly exemplary citizen, family man, and active churchgoer. But behind the image of an ordinary man lay a dark side. From 1974 to 1991, Rader committed a series of serious crimes, victimizing 10 people, men, women, and children in Wichita and Park City. His pseudonym, BTK, stood for Bind, Torture, Kill, which later became an ominous symbol of his crimes. From childhood, Dennis showed a desire for control and power. He was a withdrawn child, often isolating himself and fantasizing about subjugating others. Outwardly, he appeared quiet and disciplined, but in his mind, he lived in a world where everything was subject to his will. After serving in the Air Force, he married, got a job at ADT, a company that installed security systems, and became a respected member of society. Ironically, he was the one who helped people protect their homes from the danger that came from him. His first crime took place on January 15, 1974, when he attacked the Otero family. Everything was carefully planned, the phone lines were disabled, and he acted with frightening confidence in the house. Investigators later determined that he had thought through every step in advance. From then on, Ryder became obsessed with repeating similar actions, calling each episode his project. He didn't just break the law, he wanted to be known for it. Ryder wrote letters to local newspapers, taunted the police, described his actions in detail, and signed his letters with the pseudonym BTK. For him, it was like a game. He enjoyed the attention like an artist enjoys an audience. However, by the end of the 1970s, these messages had stopped, and the name BTK became a legend, a frightening echo in the history of Wichita. Years passed. Dennis became a church elder, was involved in the Boy Scouts, and raised children. His neighbors saw him as a punctual and even boring person. No one suspected that behind the outward orderliness lay a dark past. Later, a lot of evidence was found in his house, notes, photographs, and personal belongings of the victims, which he kept as reminders of his actions. After 1991, Ryder disappeared from view. It seemed that evil had gone away forever, but in 2004, he made himself known again. The local media began receiving new letters with riddles, hints, and the signature BTK. The police were certain that the author was the same man who had disappeared decades ago. The mistake that cost him his freedom occurred when he sent a floppy disk with electronic files to the editorial office. It contained technical data, the name Dennis, and the name of the church where he served as president of the council. On February 25, 2005, the police arrested him at his home. During questioning, Rader did not resist and calmly confessed to everything. In court, he recounted each crime with cold precision, showing no remorse. His calmness shocked even experienced investigators. Psychiatrists later noted signs of narcissistic and antisocial personality disorder in him. He perceived himself as exceptional, above others, and felt no guilt. The court sentenced him to 10 consecutive life sentences. During the hearings, Rader tried to say words of apology, but the prosecutor said that his speech sounded like gratitude for an award, not repentance. Today, Dennis Rader is serving his sentence in El Dorado prison. He's held in a separate cell, writes letters, and sometimes responds to journalists. Israel Keyes is one of the most mysterious and cold-blooded criminals in modern America. Born on January 7, 1978 in Utah, he grew up in a closed religious family where children were homeschooled and lived under strict control. His parents left the Mormon church and joined a radical movement, which shaped the boy's distorted perception of morality. Already in his teens, Israel showed a tendency toward aggression and power over others. By the age of 14, he realized how isolated he was from society. He later recalled, "I realized that what seemed normal to me frightened others." After a conflict with his parents, he left home and began to reject religion. became fascinated with dark philosophical ideas and started planning his own rituals. In 1998, Kitts joined the army. His fellow soldiers remembered him as quiet and disciplined, but prone to outbursts of anger. After his discharge, he lived in various states, worked as a builder, and led a double life, that of a model family man and a man with dark secrets. From the early 2000s, he committed serious crimes across the country, carefully planning them in advance. He chose locations in advance, hid boxes of tools, and never chose victims of a certain type, which made him unpredictable. For him, the main thing was not who, but how, the feeling of complete control over the situation. One of his most famous cases was the disappearance of the Courier couple in Vermont in 2011. Keyes hid his equipment in advance and returned 2 years later to carry out his plan. This crime demonstrated his methodical nature and ability to wait, as if he perceived everything as a game with the police. The fatal mistake was the kidnapping of 18-year-old Samantha Koenig in Anchorage in 2012. After her disappearance, the police tracked down withdrawals from the girl's card and arrested Keyes in Texas. Evidence pointing to his involvement was found in the car. During interrogations, Israel behaved calmly, talking about his crimes without emotion, as if they were just a job. He confessed to at least 3 murders, but investigators believe there may have been many more. Skulls drawn by his own hand were found in his home, possibly a symbolic reflection of the number of victims. Robert Christian Bose Hansen, known as the Baker Killer, went down in criminal history as one of America's most cold-blooded criminals. Born in Iowa in 1939, he felt like an outcast from childhood. A stutter, acne, and a strict father made him withdrawn and insecure. Deprived of friendship and support, Robert found solace in guns and hunting, a hobby that eventually became a symbol of power and control. During these years, he developed a dislike for women whom he considered unattainable. After school, Hansen served briefly in the army and worked at the police academy. Outwardly, his life was going well. He got married and worked in a bakery. But inside, aggression was brewing. In 1960, seeking revenge for the bullying, he set fire to a bus garage and was sentenced to prison. In prison, he was diagnosed with manic depression with signs of personality disorder. After his release, he moved with his family to Anchorage, Alaska, where he started a new life. Hansen opened his own bakery, became a respected resident and an excellent hunter, winning many awards. No one suspected that his love of hunting had taken a dark turn. In the early 1970s, he began attacking women, luring them with deception and threatening them with weapons. He took some of them to remote areas of Alaska, turning these places into arenas of fear. He carefully planned each crime and marked the locations where he left the bodies on a map. For a long time, the police were unable to find the culprit. Everything changed in the summer of 1983 when 17-year-old Cindy Paulson miraculously escaped. Hansen tried to hold her against her will, but the girl managed to break free and told the police everything. Investigator Glenn Float turned to FBI profiler John Douglas, who compiled a psychological profile of the criminal, a reclusive, experienced hunter who led a double life and kept trophies. The profile matched Hansen perfectly. A search of the house confirmed the suspicions: weapons, jewelry belonging to the missing women, and an aviation map with 37 marks corresponding to the locations of the bodies were found. Under the weight of the evidence, Hansen confessed to some of the crimes and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, indicating new burial sites. He claimed that he felt like a god deciding people's fates. The court sentenced him to 461 years in prison without the right to parole. Hansen spent the rest of his life in Spring Creek Prison, where he died in 2014 at the age of 75. Robert Andrew Badella Jr., known as the Kansas City Executioner, was born on January 31, 1949, in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, to a Catholic family of Italian descent. His childhood was difficult. Severe nearsightedness, a stutter, and his father's strictness made him withdrawn and insecure. After his father's death, when Robert was 16, he lost his faith and sense of stability. He later admitted that it was then that he developed a craving for control and power over others. In 1965, the young Berdella saw the film The Collector, the story of a man who holds another person against their will. This plot deeply impressed him and became the basis for his dark fantasies. After school, he enrolled at the Kansas City Institute of Arts, where he was considered a talented student, but soon gained a reputation for being eccentric and aggressive. After several incidents, he was expelled and remained in the city, starting a new life that was respectable on the outside, but increasingly dark on the inside. In the 1970s, Berdella became a chef and owner of an antique shop called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar. On the outside, he appeared to be an intelligent, benevolent man, but behind the facade lay obsessive control issues. He often invited young people he knew, promising help or a place to stay, but turned them into participants in his horrific experiments. The first murder took place in July 1984. His victim was a 19-year-old acquaintance from the market, whom Berdella lured to his home under false pretenses. After this incident, he began to keep detailed records of his actions and observations, which became his signature. Berdella's subsequent crimes became increasingly sophisticated. He deprived people of their freedom, conducted dangerous experiments on them, and recorded everything in notebooks. According to the investigation, he killed at least 6 people in total, acting according to a similar pattern. The series of murders remained unsolved until March 1988, when the last victim, Christopher Bryson, managed to escape from the criminal's house and call the police. His story was the key to exposing the killer. During a search, the police found evidence, photographs, medical supplies, and notes confirming the survivor's story. This information helped link Berdella to a number of disappearances. In 1988, he pleaded guilty to the murders of 6 men and made a deal to avoid the death penalty. The court sentenced him to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. At the hearing, Berdella claimed that he was exploring the limits of the human psyche and viewed people as objects of control. In prison, he tried to justify himself by complaining about pressure from the media and the police, but he showed no remorse. On October 8, 1992, Robert Berdella died of a heart attack at the age of 43. Dean Arnold Corll, who went down in history as the Candy Man, was one of the most brutal criminals of the 20th century. He was born on December 24, 1939 in Fort Worth, Texas, into a family where strictness and emotional conflicts were the norm. His father was demanding and quick-tempered. His mother was domineering and inconsistent. As a child, Dean was a quiet, withdrawn child who had little contact with his peers and showed an early desire for control and isolation. His parents divorced and remarried several times, creating an atmosphere of instability. His mother opened a small candy store where Dean worked and earned the nickname Candy Man, at that time without any sinister connotations. He appeared friendly and polite, but increasingly showed emotional coldness and an obsessive interest in teenagers, whom he offered sweets and help. By the early 1970s, Corll had become familiar to many kids in Houston. He treated them to candy, invited them to parties, and promised easy money. In reality, this was a carefully constructed cover. He sought out vulnerable teenagers, those whose parents were not looking for them, and whose disappearance would not arouse suspicion. From 1970 to 1973, boys and young men between the ages of 13 and 20 began to disappear in the area. At first, the police thought they were running away from home, not suspecting that one man was behind it all. Dean did not act alone. He was assisted by 2 teenagers, David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. They helped lure victims to Corll's house under the pretext of parties or part-time jobs. There, He deprived them of their freedom and subjected them to abuse, driven by a lust for power. Coral planned his crimes meticulously, using handcuffs, duct tape, and ropes. He photographed his victims and kept their belongings as trophies. He buried the bodies in various places, on Boulevard Beach, in barns, and in vacant lots, trying not to leave any traces. In August 1973, his streak came to an end. Elmer Henley brought two more acquaintances to the house, Tim Curley and Ron Williams. When they realized that Coral was going to kill them too, a fight broke out between them. Coral lunged at Henley, but Henley shot him. The death of the Candyman put an end to a 3-year nightmare that the city had no idea about. After their arrest, Henley and Brooks confessed. The investigation established that Dean Coral had killed at least 27 teenagers over 3 years. Excavations revealed the scale of the tragedy. Bodies were found in different parts of the county, and many families had considered their sons missing for years. Patrick Wayne Kearney, known as the Highway Killer, was born on September 24, 1939, in East Los Angeles. His childhood was not a happy one. A sickly, shy boy with a difficult personality, he was often the target of ridicule. Over the years, his introversion grew into a gloomy detachment and a craving for control. His father, who served in the police force, tried to toughen up his son by teaching him how to use a gun. It was then, according to Patrick, that he first felt a sense of power over life and death. After school, Kirby served in the army, where he demonstrated discipline and learned Spanish. There he met a man named David Hill, with whom he subsequently lived for many years. Their relationship became a refuge for him, but it did not rid him of his inner emptiness. After leaving the army, he got a job as an engineer at Hughes Aircraft, led a modest life, and did not arouse suspicion. However, it was then that the predator in him awoke. He began picking up young men on the roads, meeting them in bars, and taking them out of town. By his own admission, he committed his first murder in 1962. From then on, for a decade and a half, he operated in various areas of Southern California, killing random passengers and covering his tracks with frightening methodicalness. Kearney was known for his cold calculation. He carefully planned each crime, got rid of evidence, and always acted alone. His victims were mostly young people who trustingly accepted his help or offer of a ride. Many of them were from dysfunctional families or were considered runaways, so the police did not connect the disappearances. By the mid-1970s, the crimes had become more frequent. Kearney had a stable job, a house in Torrance, and a quiet reputation. No one had any idea who he really was. Everything changed in March 1977 when 17-year-old John Otis LeMay disappeared. Traces were left at the crime scene that pointed to Kirby, carpet fibers and biological evidence. Realizing that the investigation was close, he turned himself into the police and confessed to the crimes. During interrogations, Kirby recounted the crimes with frightening calm. He confessed to 28 murders and described in detail how he had acted. Investigators noted his remarkable memory and lack of emotion. To avoid the death penalty, he made a deal with investigators, pleading guilty to 21 counts. The court sentenced him to 21 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Robert Lee Yates Jr., who later became one of the most notorious serial killers in the United States, was born on May 27, 1952, in Oak Harbor, Washington. His family was strict and deeply religious, combining discipline with emotional coldness. From childhood, Yates grew up withdrawn and aloof, preferring solitude. Later, neighbors remembered him as a polite and quiet boy, as if living in his own world. After school, he began working in a correctional facility, where he got a taste of power and control. In 1977, he enlisted in the U.S. Army, became a helicopter pilot, and participated in international missions. His colleagues noted him as a responsible and balanced person. At that point, No one suspected that dangerous inner impulses were hidden behind the image of an exemplary soldier. Yates' family seemed perfect: a loving wife, Linda, 5 children, and a stable life. But behind the outward calm, changes were taking place. He became withdrawn, often left in the evenings, and increasingly distanced himself from his loved ones. It later became clear that it was during these periods that he was looking for victims. Yates committed his first murder in 1975, long before his military service. At that time, the police were unable to identify the perpetrator, and the case remained unsolved. Years later, starting in the late 1980s, women began to disappear in Spokane and its surroundings. All of the victims belonged to socially vulnerable groups, those who easily trusted strangers. Yates, who was skilled at gaining trust, acted calmly and methodically, carefully covering his tracks. From the early 1990s, the crimes became more frequent. Yates used his van for transportation, giving women rides, promising help or money, and then attacking them. He had technical knowledge, which helped him leave no evidence behind. But gradually, investigators began to notice patterns: identical evidence, DNA matches, and the locations where the bodies were found. Everything changed in 1998 when a survivor named Christine Smith gave the police a detailed description of her attacker and his car. Checks confirmed that a respected Army veteran, Robert Yates, was under suspicion. During a search, evidence was found linking him to a number of murders, including traces of blood in his car and an underground burial site near his home. In April 2000, Yates was arrested. He behaved calmly and emotionlessly, stating that he couldn't stop. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 13 murders and received 408 years in prison. 2 death sentences were later added to his sentence. At the trial, Yates apologized to the victims' families, but his coldness made a heavy impression on everyone. Psychiatrists described him as a man who had lost empathy and a sense of morality, but who possessed the discipline and precision of a soldier. In 2018, after the death penalty was abolished in Washington, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without parole. Today, Robert Lee Yates remains in a maximum security prison, symbolizing how absolute darkness can hide behind a facade of respectability. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland, into a large working-class family. He was the youngest of 8 children and had a quick temper and disobedient nature from childhood. At the age of 7, he was sent to a school for difficult children, where he became even more withdrawn and aggressive. He later ran away from home, served in the French Foreign Legion, and then went to prison several times for petty crimes. Even in his youth, he showed signs of being a manipulator. He lied easily, knew how to charm people, but felt no remorse. Women often succumbed to his charm. Tobin was married 3 times, and each time the relationship began romantically, but ended in fear and violence. His ex-wives remembered him as a jealous and unpredictable man who knew how to be charming, but could instantly turn into a despot. This duality, attractiveness and cruelty, became his hallmark. In 1993, in Margate, England, Tobin committed a crime that revealed his true nature for the first time. He lured 2 underage girls into his apartment and attacked them. Both survived, and he was soon arrested and sentenced to 14 years in prison. After serving 10 years, he was released in 2004 for good behavior. Shortly after his release, he began hiding under false names again, violating police orders. In 2006, Tobin got a job at St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow under the name Pat McLaughlin. There he met 23-year-old Polish student Angelica Kruk, who lived at the church and helped with the housework. On September 24th, the girl disappeared. A few days later, the police found her body under the floor of the church. The evidence pointed to Tobin, who had managed to flee by that time. He was arrested in London. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. The judge called him the embodiment of evil. After that, the police began to compare his DNA with unsolved cases. In his former home in Margate, the remains of two girls were found under a concrete slab. 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton, who disappeared in 1991, and 18-year-old Dina McNichol, who disappeared that same summer. The investigation established that both were victims of Tobin. In December 2008, he received a second life sentence, and a year later, a third. Psychiatrists described Tobin as a man with pronounced psychopathy, devoid of empathy and capable of cold-blooded actions. His behavior in court was strikingly calm. He expressed neither remorse nor fear. After his conviction, the police launched a large-scale investigation called Operation Anagram to determine how many crimes he might have been involved in. More than 1,000 cases across the UK were reviewed. Tobin himself boasted that he had more victims than the infamous Harold Shipman. Investigators suspected that there could be as many as 40, but only 3 could be proven. For a long time, there was speculation that Tobin could be the legendary killer known as Biblical John, who operated in Glasgow in the 1960s. Similarities in profile and habits suggested a connection, but DNA testing ruled this out. Nevertheless, many criminologists believe that he may have been involved in a number of other disappearances. Tobin spent his last years in Edinburgh prison, seriously ill. He died on October 8, 2022, at the age of 76, without ever revealing the whole truth about his past. Donald Henry P.V. Gaskins was born on March 13, 1933, in Florence County, South Carolina, and became one of the most notorious criminals in U.S. history. His biography is a grim illustration of how a combination of violence, poverty, and indifference can shape a dangerous personality. Gaskins' childhood was marked by poverty and constant conflict. He was born out of wedlock, and according to neighbors' recollections, his mother paid little attention to him. From an early age, he faced neglect and cruelty. His frailty and small stature made him the object of ridicule, and the lack of family support gave rise to internal aggression and alienation. As a teenager, Gaskins began committing petty crimes, ranging from theft to arson. At the age of 13, he was tried for the first time for assault. While serving his sentence in a correctional facility, he encountered harsh conditions and violence, which according to experts permanently damaged his psyche. After his release, he was unable to adapt to normal life and continued on his criminal path. Over the next 2 decades, he was repeatedly imprisoned for theft, assault, and other illegal activities. Despite his criminal past, Gaskins had a natural ability to inspire trust. He was talkative and outwardly friendly, skillfully hiding his inner coldness. People who knew him often noted that there was a certain tension behind his smile. By the end of the 1960s, he had finally turned to serious crime. Living in the small town of Prospect, he looked like an ordinary resident, calm, hardworking, even friendly. But behind this image lay a dark side, a double life of crime, blackmail, and violence. Gaskins' motives always remained unclear. His actions combined a desire for power, greed, and inner aggression. He acted without a system or predictability, which made him especially dangerous. His victims were random people and sometimes acquaintances who had become inconvenient for him. It was this unpredictability that earned him a reputation as one of the most violent criminals of his time. Gaskins was arrested in 1975 after a long-time acquaintance confessed to the police about crimes that had been going on for years. The investigation revealed that there were graves around his house, and the scale of the crimes shocked even experienced investigators. At the trial, the public was horrified by what they heard. The jury had no doubt about his guilt, and in 1976, Gaskins was sentenced to death. However, due to changes in the law, the sentence was soon commuted to life imprisonment. Even behind bars, Gaskins did not change. In 1982, he was again at the center of a high-profile case, this time in prison itself. His actions led to a second death sentence, which was carried out almost 10 years later. Until the end of his life, he showed no remorse and continued to claim that he had committed more crimes than the investigation had established. Donald Gaskins was executed on September 6, 1991. A few hours before his execution, he attempted suicide but was saved. His last words before the sentence was carried out were short and emotionless, just like his entire life, which passed without a trace of remorse. Charles Edmund Cullen is one of the most mysterious and frightening serial criminals in modern America. Born on February 22, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey, he appeared to be a man incapable of evil. Modest, quiet, attentive to his patients, Cullen was considered a conscientious medical professional dedicated to helping people. But behind this mask lurked a cold-blooded killer whose actions shook the U.S. healthcare system. Cullen's childhood was difficult and full of loss. His father died when the boy was only a few months old, and his mother died in a car accident when Charles turned 18. The loss of his mother was a turning point for him. He was left completely alone and sank into a deep depression. He experienced several crises and suffered from feelings of isolation and loneliness. After a short stint in the Navy, where he also had mental health issues, Cullen decided to become a nurse, hoping, as he later said, to help people and be needed. From the beginning of his medical career in the late 1980s, he gave the impression of being a responsible employee. However, his colleagues soon began to notice strange coincidences. Unexplained deaths of patients occurred in the wards where he worked. At the time, no one could believe that he himself could be the cause. Cullen used medical drugs for purposes other than those intended, disguising his actions as natural occurrences. When management began to suspect something was wrong, he simply resigned and moved to another hospital, taking advantage of the fact that institutions did not report their suspicions for fear of legal consequences. Thus began his 16-year career of death, a series of crimes spanning dozens of hospitals in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Cullen enjoyed the trust of patients and colleagues, which allowed him to act without suspicion. His victims were the most vulnerable people under medical supervision. He did not use physical violence. His weapons were his knowledge and access to medication. His motives remain a mystery even today. Cullen himself claimed that he wanted to relieve patients of their suffering and prevent, as he put it, meaningless treatment. He called his actions acts of mercy. However, investigators and psychiatrists thought otherwise. Many of his patients were in stable condition and on the road to recovery. Experts concluded that Cullen did not show compassion, but rather had a desire for absolute control over life and death, a manifestation of deeply rooted selfishness and a distorted sense of power. Despite numerous suspicions, Cullen remained unpunished for a long time. The healthcare system, concerned about its reputation, effectively allowed him to evade responsibility. Michael Joseph Swango, born on October 21, 1954 in New York City, became one of the most sinister criminals in U.S. history, a doctor who turned medicine into an instrument of power and control. Outwardly, he was the epitome of professionalism, disciplined, polite, intelligent, with impeccable posture. But behind this facade was a man whose actions violated the Hippocratic Oath and shocked society. According to the investigation, his actions could have led to dozens, and possibly as many as 60, human casualties in the United States and beyond. His childhood did not foreshadow a tragic future. Swango grew up in Quincy, Illinois, in a military family. His father, a Vietnam veteran, returned home severely traumatized, suffered from addiction and mental illness, and soon left the family. Michael became close to his mother, a woman of strict principles who taught her son discipline and hard work. He was a gifted student, showed an interest in science and medicine, and graduated from high school with honors. He later served in the Marine Corps, where he developed a cult of self-control and physical endurance, traits that made him appear to be the ideal professional, but internally cold and withdrawn. He entered Southern Illinois University's medical school with excellent recommendations, but even there, disturbing traits began to emerge. His classmates noted his strange behavior. Swango was often interested in cases of serious illness and sought to be present when patients were in critical condition. Despite his academic success, he gave the impression of being a person who cared more about effect than empathy. When he was caught falsifying medical reports, he was nearly expelled, but he avoided punishment and received a degree that paved the way for future crimes. After graduation, Swango began his residency at the Ohio State University Medical Center. It was here that mysterious patient deaths began to occur, almost always during his shift. The nurses noticed strange behavior, but their complaints were not taken seriously. Fearing scandal, the hospital administration allowed him to quietly resign without formal charges. This case was the first in a series of similar incidents. Institutions designed to protect patients actually gave him the opportunity to escape responsibility. After leaving the hospital, Swango got a job as an ambulance technician in his native Illinois. Soon, his colleagues began to experience a sharp deterioration in their health, and the police became interested in his activities. During a search, dangerous chemicals were found in his possession. The court found him guilty of poisoning his colleagues, and Swango was sentenced to 5 years in prison. After his release, he tried to start a new life, but the urge to control and dominate others had already become part of his nature. In the early 1990s, Swango forged documents, changed his name, and returned to medicine. He obtained positions at hospitals in South Dakota and New York, posing as an experienced doctor. Despite his past, he quickly gained the trust of his colleagues and patients. However, unusual deaths soon began to occur in the departments where he worked. He acted deliberately, using doses of drugs that could cause serious complications and masking them as natural causes. When suspicions became obvious, Swango left the country. In 1994, under a false name, he got a job as a doctor at a missionary clinic in Zimbabwe. Soon, several deaths with signs of intoxication occurred there, but due to a lack of equipment, the investigation was unsuccessful. He later left the country, traveling throughout Africa and the Middle East, posing as various specialists. He was wanted by the FBI, but remained elusive for a long time. Donald Harvey, born on April 15, 1952, in Hamilton, Ohio, went down in history as one of the most mysterious and controversial serial criminals operating in the medical field. His crimes, spanning nearly 2 decades, took place in hospitals in Kentucky and Ohio, where he worked as an orderly. At first glance, Harvey was a model employee, polite, punctual, and attentive to patients. But behind this outward respectability lurked a man who, by his own admission, was involved in dozens of deaths. He called himself the Angel of Death, claiming that he was relieving the suffering from pain. Harvey spent his childhood in a poor rural family living on a tobacco farm. His parents raised him strictly, but the atmosphere at home was far from happy. As a teenager, he experienced serious psychological trauma, which left a mark on his further development. He dropped out of school early, was unable to adapt to the army, and soon found work as a paramedic. There, his diligence and restraint quickly earned him the trust of his colleagues. However, it was during this period that he formed the idea that he was capable of controlling the life and death of patients. The first case, according to Harvey himself, occurred in 1970, when he was only 18. At that time, he decided to intervene in the fate of a seriously ill patient. He later said that he acted out of compassion, but admitted that his motives were more emotional and not related to mercy. This episode marked the beginning of a long journey during which he stopped looking for excuses for his actions. Harvey subsequently used various methods, including the improper use of medications and toxic substances. Patients died suddenly and for no apparent reason, and doctors often attributed this to natural complications. In the early stages of his career, Harvey probably truly believed that he was alleviating the suffering of the terminally ill. But over time, his motives changed. He began to derive inner satisfaction not from helping, but from the very feeling of power. His confessions show that over time, he began to view death as a personal tool of control. Compassion gave way to complacency and a narcissistic sense of power. Gradually, the boundaries blurred. Harvey began to act outside the hospital walls. He used dangerous substances outside of work, against acquaintances and even loved ones if he felt they had betrayed or annoyed him. These cases showed that he no longer needed moral justifications. His actions became increasingly impulsive, driven by jealousy and a desire to dominate. For a long time, Harvey went unpunished. Medical institutions did not conduct thorough checks on orderlies, and the high mortality rate among seriously ill patients did not arouse suspicion. Those who noticed strange coincidences, for example, that most deaths occurred during his shifts, preferred not to get involved. Management feared publicity and avoided investigations. Thanks to this, Harvey was able to operate for more than 15 years without being noticed. The exposure began in 1987. The death of one of the patients aroused the suspicion of doctors, and soon a forensic examination revealed the presence of dangerous substances in the body. The investigation quickly established that Harvey was the last person to have contact with this patient. He was summoned for questioning, where he unexpectedly confessed to the crime. This confession became the starting point for a large-scale investigation that shook the entire medical system in the region. Journalist Pat Menarcine from WCPO-TV played a key role in uncovering the case. After receiving information from nurses who had long suspected Harvey, he conducted his own investigation. It soon became clear that the mortality rate in the hospitals where Harvey worked rose sharply during his shifts. Under pressure from the evidence, Harvey confessed to dozens of crimes, stating that he could not give an exact number. In August 1987, he officially pleaded guilty to 24 murders to avoid the death penalty. Later, he recounted many other incidents. Investigators confirmed at least 37 proven cases, although Harvey himself claimed there were more than 80. The court sentenced him to several life sentences without the possibility of parole. In prison, Harvey behaved calmly and tried to present his actions as acts of kindness. However, psychiatrists concluded that this was a form of self-justification. Behind the mask of caring lay an obsession with control and a sense of his own exceptionality. He considered himself a judge who decided who would live and who would die. On March 28, 2017, 30 years after his arrest, Donald Harvey was found severely injured in his cell. He died in the hospital 2 days later. His cellmate confessed to the attack and was sentenced to additional time in prison. Скотли Кимбл, родившийся 21 сентября 1966 года в Боулдере, штат Колорадо, вошел в историю как один из самых опасных и коварных преступников США. Человек, чьи убийства, аферы и обман оказались тесно переплетены с сотрудничеством с ФБР. Его история поражает сочетанием расчета и безжалостности. Он манипулировал не только своими жертвами, но и федеральными агентами, использовал систему правосудия в собственных целях и, оставаясь на службе у ФБР, совершал тяжкие преступления. Его ранние годы уже предвещали искаженный жизненный путь. Родители развелись, когда Скотту было 10, и он тяжело пережил уход отца. В подростковом возрасте он стал свидетелем и жертвой жестокого обращения, что оставило глубокий психологический след. Пережив попытку самоубийства, после которой, по словам родственников, он стал совершенно другим, Кимбл потерял эмоциональные границы и чувство сострадания. Юность Кимбла прошла под знаком обмана. Он с ранних лет занимался мошенничеством, создавал фиктивные компании, подделывал чеки, выманивал деньги у бизнес-партнеров. Его аферы охватывали штаты Монтана, Вашингтон и Колорадо. Каждый раз после освобождения из тюрьмы он обещал начать новую жизнь, но все вновь сводилось к обману и манипуляциям. Он был женат несколько раз, однако все браки заканчивались из-за лжи, угроз и контроля. В 2001 году, находясь в федеральной тюрьме, Кимбл вновь проявил свой талант к убеждению. Он сообщил агентам ФБР, что располагает сведениями о готовящихся преступлениях против федеральных чиновников, и предложил себя в роли информатора. Его слова проверять не стали, ему поверили. Благодаря этому он получил статус осведомителя, временную свободу и даже оплату от Федерального бюро. Под прикрытием сотрудничества с ФБР началась серия его настоящих преступлений. С 2002 по 2004 год Кимбл лишил жизни как минимум 4 человек. Его жертвами стали Лиэн Эмри, 24 года, Дженнифер Маркум, 25 лет, Кейси Маклеод, 19 лет, и его дядя Терри Кимбл. Все они исчезли при загадочных обстоятельствах, и последним, кто их видел, всегда был Скотт. После исчезновений он использовал их документы, банковские карты и телефоны, чтобы создавать видимость, будто эти люди живы. Первой исчезла Лиэн Эмри, молодая женщина, страдавшая психическим расстройством и доверявшая Кимблу. Она считала его другом и партнером. Последний раз она звонила родным, сообщив, что отправляется с ним в поездку, после чего бесследно пропала. Позже полиция нашла ее автомобиль в другом штате, но следы самой женщины обнаружить удалось лишь годы спустя. Следом исчезла Дженнифер Маркум, танцовщица, связанная с людьми из криминальной среды. Кимбл уверял ФБР, что помогает расследовать ее пропажу, хотя именно он был виновен в ее исчезновении. Еще одна жертва — Кейси Маклеод, падчерица Кимбла, которая недавно освободилась от зависимости и пыталась начать новую жизнь. Когда девушка пропала, Кимбл убеждал свою жену, что та уехала по личным делам, а позже подбросил вещи, чтобы создать иллюзию ее возвращения. Последним его погибшим родственником стал дядя Терри, приехавший помочь Скотту в делах. После его исчезновения Кимбл начал использовать его имя и банковские счета. Разоблачение началось в 2006 году, случайно, в ходе расследования финансовых махинаций. В доме Кимбла нашли поддельные документы, банковские карты и улики, связанные с исчезнувшими людьми. Его бывшая жена Лори Маклеод дала следствию ключевые показания, рассказав о его странном поведении и угрозах после исчезновения ее дочери. Следователи сопоставили данные и поняли: все эти случаи объединяет один человек. Наибольший резонанс вызвало то, что в момент совершения преступлений Кимбл все еще числился действующим информатором ФБР. Его куратор, агент Карл Шлафф, позднее признал, что доверял Скотту и не проверял многие его слова. Этот скандал стал серьезным ударом по репутации бюро и показал, насколько опасным может быть злоупотребление доверием. Richard Leonard Kuklinski, known by the nickname the Iceman, became one of the most controversial figures in U.S. criminal history. A man who knew how to combine cold calculation with outward respectability. His life is a story of duality, how the image of a model family man can hide a person for whom violence is a habitual tool of power. He was born on April 11, 1935, in Jersey City, New Jersey, to Polish immigrants Stanley and Anna McNeely, an American of Irish descent. His childhood was spent in an atmosphere of fear and instability. His parents often quarreled, his father abused alcohol, and his mother, a deeply religious woman, responded with severity and punishment. When Richard was 6 years old, one of his brothers died under mysterious circumstances, an event that became a turning point in his life. These childhood traumas shaped his habit of hiding his feelings, trusting no one, and responding to pain with cold detachment. As a teenager, Richard realized early on that the world around him did not forgive weakness. He became withdrawn and quick-tempered, got involved in street fights, and gradually lost touch with moral boundaries. Adult life quickly led him into a criminal environment, At first, it was petty crimes, then smuggling and financial fraud. He got married at the age of 20, but the family soon fell apart. Later, he met Barbara Pedrici, the woman who would become his wife and the mother of his 3 children. To his neighbors in the quiet suburb of Dumont, he seemed like the perfect father and a kind-hearted person. He organized picnics, took the children to church, and helped neighbors with their shopping. No one suspected that behind this outward normality lay a man with a dark side, capable of a cold-bloodedness that was impossible to detect in everyday life. Kuklinski started out in the underground trade and pirated videotapes, which soon led him to contacts with members of the mafia. One of his acquaintances was Roy DeMeo, a well-known member of the Gambino crime family. This acquaintance drew Kuklinski into criminal schemes, from financial scams to the elimination of witnesses. Over the years, he became what criminal circles considered a universal executor, a person capable of carrying out any assignment without unnecessary fuss. He acted methodically, avoiding witnesses and leaving no traces. His ability to plan played an important role. Kuklinski always prepared thoroughly, thinking through every detail. It was precisely for this coldness, pedantry, and lack of emotion that journalists would later call him the Iceman. At home, he was different. His wife Barbara recalled that Kuklinski was attentive, caring, and generous, but could suddenly change his mood and fly into a rage. He strictly controlled his family, demanded obedience, and decided for himself who his children could associate with. To the outside world, he remained a man of impeccable reputation, someone who always kept his word and was ready to help. By the early 1980s, New Jersey police began to notice an alarming pattern. Several men involved in underground deals had disappeared without a trace. All of them had once had dealings with Kuklinski. The investigation was codenamed Operation Iceman, and as part of it, Kuklinski was placed under surveillance. ATF Special Agent Dominic Polifron went undercover, posing as a mafia representative. During their meetings, Kuklinski openly shared stories about his work and described his methods as if he were talking about business. After a year and a half of surveillance, Richard was arrested on December 17, 1986. At the time, he was preparing for a new job, unaware that his conversation partner was a federal agent. During his arrest, he behaved calmly and did not resist, merely remarking, "It seems you've watched too many movies." In 1988, the court found him guilty of several murders and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the right to parole. He later received an additional sentence after confessing to another crime. During interrogations, Kuklinski claimed that he had killed over 100 people and that he worked for the mafia, but most of these claims were not confirmed. Investigators believed that some of his confessions were an attempt to create an aura of a legendary criminal. While in prison, Kuklinski became one of the most studied inmates. His interviews and conversations with psychologists formed the basis for documentary films. He talked about his crimes with frightening calmness, expressing neither regret nor pride. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with a combination of antisocial and paranoid personality disorders, a rare condition in which a person loses the ability to empathize, but retains a high level of intelligence and control over their behavior. He spent the last years of his life in a prison hospital, suffering from heart problems. In 2005, his condition worsened, and doctors warned that there was no chance of recovery. On March 5, 2006, Richard Kuklinski died at the age of 70. Robert Leonard Spengler was a man whose life appeared to be a model of American success, but inside he was coldly calculating and willing to kill for his own peace of mind. His story is an example of how outward prosperity can be nothing more than a carefully constructed facade hiding darkness within. For several decades, Spengler was able to create an aura of intelligence, kindness, and respectability around himself, while ruthlessly eliminating those who interfered with his ideal picture of life. He was born on January 10, 1933 in Iowa into a wealthy family. His father, an engineer and teacher, was a man of principles and strict standards. The university where he worked even named a laboratory after him. Little Robert grew up in an atmosphere of academic rigor and constant pressure to perform. He was required to be perfect in his studies, behavior, and sports. Mistakes were not forgiven, and emotions were considered a weakness. From childhood, he learned to restrain himself and hide his inner feelings behind a polite smile, a habit that would later become his main weapon. After school, Spengler married his first love, Nancy, and in the mid-1950s, the family moved to Littleton, Colorado. They had 2 children, Susan and David. Outwardly, they were the embodiment of the American dream. A well-kept house, a neat lawn, friendly neighbors, and stable jobs. Robert held prestigious positions, from specialist at American Waterworks to head of public relations at a charitable organization. He loved attention, participated in theater productions, and appeared on the radio. His colleagues saw him as a charismatic, intelligent, and punctual person, capable of speaking brilliantly and inspiring confidence. But behind the facade of the ideal image was a man who was used to controlling everything. At home, he was domineering, demanding, and stingy with his emotions. His wife Nancy felt that she was living with a man who had no compassion. By the end of the 1970s, their relationship was falling apart. Robert began an affair with his colleague Sharon Cooper and dreamed of a new life, but did not want to lose his reputation as a model family man. For him, divorce meant defeat, and Spengler did not forgive defeat, either for himself or for others. December 30th, 1978 became the day when his life was finally divided into before and after. In the morning, remaining outwardly calm, he lured his wife into the basement under the pretext of a gift, where he took her life and then killed his children. After that, he carefully staged the scene of murder and suicide. He typed a fake note, placed evidence around the room, and called the police. The investigation, finding no direct evidence against him, closed the case. All the evidence, including the weapon, was returned to the grieving father. 7 months after the tragedy, Robert married the woman for whom he had started it all, Sharon Cooper. He looked respectable again, attended parties, and participated in local cultural projects. Outwardly, he was still the same charming intellectual, but in his new family, he displayed the same traits: coldness, jealousy, and control. After her father's death, Sharon noticed his growing cruelty and told her friends that she was afraid of her husband. Her fears were confirmed. In 1988, she filed for divorce. 2 years later, Spengler married for the 3rd time to Donna Sandling, an energetic woman who taught aerobics. Donna was the complete opposite of Robert, cheerful, open, and loved noisy company and nature. But after only 3 years, this union ended in tragedy. On April 11th, 1993, the couple went to the Grand Canyon, supposedly to save their relationship. Donna did not want to go. She was afraid of heights, but Robert insisted. The next day, he went to the Rangers and calmly reported that his wife had fallen off a cliff. Her death was ruled an accident. Spengler appeared genuinely grief-stricken, appeared on television shows, gave interviews, talking about the love of his life and the dangers of mountain trails. His appearances evoked sympathy and even admiration. His ability to speak and appear convincing once again worked in his favor. A year later, he resumed communication with his ex-wife, Sharon Cooper, who soon died of a sleeping pill overdose. The investigation again ruled the death accidental. Robert received $20,000 in insurance money and continued to live as if nothing had happened. It was only in the late 1990s that investigators began to connect the episodes scattered across years and states. FBI agents, analyzing data from old cases, noticed that one person appeared in all the stories alongside the victims: Robert Spengler. His calm demeanor, mannerisms, and the similar circumstances of the deaths caught the attention of profilers at the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. Psychologists described him as an organized serial killer with narcissistic personality traits, a man for whom murder was a way to maintain control and avoid humiliation. When investigators came to his home in 2000, Spengler was already seriously ill with lung and brain cancer. He initially denied guilt, but later, during a confidential conversation with an agent, he unexpectedly confessed. His calmness shocked everyone. He recounted how he had killed his wife and children in 1978, staging a suicide, and confessed that he had pushed Donna into the ravine. His confession was the final piece in an investigation that had lasted more than 20 years. In exchange for his confession, he was allowed to avoid the death penalty. The court sentenced Robert Spengler to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He died on August 5, 2001, at the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri.